Okay, let's just see if this is all working. Great. Hi, everybody, and welcome to a very special interview that I'm conducting with the United States Special Envoy against anti-Semitism, the excellent Elan Carr, who has really brought the most distinguished air to this extremely important government position. He's been amazingly effective, and I know him well as a gentleman, as a person always ready and able to assist any in need. He's an extraordinary man. And Elan, thank you for joining us. You're such a busy man, and I'm truly grateful.
Thank you for having me. It's really an honor and a pleasure. And really, Rabbi, I want to thank you for everything you do. You elevate us all, and you elevate our country with your emphasis on values at a time, I have to tell you, when rediscovering our values, I think has to be a top national priority. So I want to thank you for everything you do to remind us of those Judeo-Christian values on which our country was built.
Well, that's kind of you. Flattery will get you everywhere, but I'm not the one who's been battling the darkness of anti-Semitism on behalf of the United States government. I can't think of a more august, a more important role than to have the world's sole superpower, the world's greatest republic, the very beacon of freedom, liberty, democracy, creating this post that was created in 2004 to fight the world's oldest anti-Semitism. So let's just begin with talking about what your role focuses on.
Well, first of all, the point you raised is excellent. You know, it's a remarkable statement that the most powerful country in the history of the world has devoted itself in such a fashion through a bipartisan act of Congress in 2004, but then just now, I mean, there was another piece of legislation that just passed that that gives my office more authority.
I wanted to talk
about by presidents, and that's
yes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I wanted to talk about that as well. I was going to ask you about that because talk about a timely interview. The United States, the House just voted on Friday, right, to elevate your position to a full ambassadorship.
And the Senate, it passed both houses of Congress.
Passed both houses, okay. So it awaits the president's signature?
Correct.
Amazing.
Correct.
Okay.
But that just goes to show you that, again, there is the United States has made this fight its own, has taken upon itself the obligation to fight anti-Semitism. Now, of course, the obvious question, it's the question that is begged is why? Why this particular hatred? I mean, there are a lot of evils in the world. Well, first of all, I would say that the United States has a pretty good track record of fighting a whole host of evils. We've taken a stand on religious liberty in the world and on freedom and democracy. And so we have a great track record of fighting evil. But anti-Semitism is different. Anti-Semitism is unique in its ubiquity. We see anti-Semitism throughout history in the most diverse geographical areas from different cultures, different religions. So its ubiquity, its persistence. I mean, who would believe that 75 years after the end of the Holocaust, the greatest evil ever perpetrated by humankind, the attempt to exterminate an entire people, and frankly, nearly successful, 6 million Jews murdered, 1.5 million innocent children murdered. Who would have believed 75 years later anti-Semitism would be rising? You have to think, well, was the Holocaust not enough to sate this insatiable hatred? And so, first of all, it's ubiquity. Second of all, it's indefatigability, its continuous recurrence throughout history. And third of all, its destructive power. And here is something very important to remember. Anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic movements don't just hurt Jews. They hurt Jews, and they hurt Jews badly. But anti-Semitic movements are destructive by definition. I mean, look at the wreckage, the human wreckage brought about, visited upon the world by movements that define themselves through anti-Semitism. We just talked about the Holocaust, but it's not just 6 million Jews. A continent was left in ruins by the Nazis. But let's make it contemporary. Let's look at the movements today that define themselves through anti-Semitism. Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, the Islamic Republic of Iran. These are Daesh, ISIS. These are movements for which anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, is not a footnote. It's not an ancillary feature. It is a core defining principle. And these are movements that are profoundly, uniquely destructive. And so in fighting anti-Semitism, the United States isn't merely doing a favor for one particular minority, but rather is standing against evil, is taking a stand against a barometer, an historic barometer of evil and human suffering. And that's what's so important here. President Trump, every time he speaks of anti-Semitism, always calls it the vile poison of anti-Semitism. And I think that's such an important description because every society in history that has imbibed the poison has rotted to its core because of it. And so this is a critical fight. It's America's fight, and it's really a fight for humanity and for the future that all of us want our children to inherit.
Let's get philosophical for a moment. You mentioned that this is the world's oldest hatred, and it's ubiquitous, and it exists in countries where there are no Jews. It exists in countries where there's no history of Jewish accomplishment or Jewish failure. There are countries where the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, for example, are bestsellers, and they have no Jewish residents.
No Jews, right?
So
That's right.
let's get philosophical for a moment. I can kind of understand the abomination of racism, hatred of people of color. There was a need on the part of, I don't know, lighter skinned people to dominate, enslave darker skinned people. They quite literally needed their labor done. There's a perverse logic to it. There's a horrible logic to it. It was an easily identifiable group. Based on evolutionary terms, you can make the argument that they were subhuman in some ways, the same way that the Nazis saw Slavs, etc., people who look visibly different. But given that there are Black Jews, white Jews, Jews of every shade and every color, and we're still hated, even when we're not necessarily identifiable, then you might say, well, the Jews are hated because they're not Christian. So it was or Muslims. So it was the overarching religions that saw their faith as an insurgency. But then again, religious anti-Semitism morphed into a racial, or I should say, religious anti-Judaism morphed into racial anti-Semitism. So even in countries that were completely secular, like the Soviet Union or China, communist China, or of course Nazism, which was a godless statist ideology, the Jews were so hated. Do you have a philosophy behind this, Elan, as to why you think wherever we go, this hatred for the Jews arises?
Well, I think that a key part of this is values. We started by talking about values. The Jews have brought so much to civilization into the world. The idea of one God, the idea of one standard of measure, the idea of every human soul being created in the image of God and thereby having not only certain rights and privileges, but virtually unlimited potential, from which follows obligations of a human being to realize that potential. The idea of perfecting the world, inheriting a broken world and laboring to make it better, being an obligation. These are, in Judaism, commandments. I think very, very much so that anti-Semitism is a spiritual rebellion against those very values. It is the rebellion against human conscience. By the way, Hitler, I'm not fond of quoting him, as you might imagine, but he understood this. He said, the Jews are the conscience of humanity. We will never succeed in vanquishing the conscience unless we destroy the Jews. And that's Hitler saying that. So I think there really is an ingredient there, which explains, as you pointed out, the constant irrationality of anti-Semitism. Jews are hated putatively, right? Professed to be hated because they're isolated and unto their own. They're professed to be hated because they've managed to infiltrate into society. These are opposites, right? But they're hated for both reasons. Jews are professed to be hated because they're undermining socialists. Jews are professed to be hated because they're greedy capitalists. Again, opposites. And this continues. I mean, you go all the way down the list and you find that Jews are professed to be hated for traits that cannot coexist, that are opposites. Someone once said to me, well, isn't it because Jews didn't integrate? Well, in some places Jews didn't integrate, but the Holocaust happened to have begun in the most integrated country ever. I mean, German Jews regarded themselves, in fact, many were shocked to be persecuted. They said, I'm German, I'm not Jewish. They regarded themselves as more German than Jewish. That's where the Holocaust began. And so it's not about this kind of Jew or that kind of Jew. It's not about capitalism, socialism. It really is it's a fundamental, profound spiritual sickness. That's what anti-Semitism is. Let's be clear. It is a spiritual sickness.
That's a profound statement. You said it's a spiritual sickness. It's a disease, not even of the mind, of the heart, but almost of the spirit.
Soul. It is. It's a disease of the soul.
Yeah, no, I agree with you fully. I thank you for your eloquence in elucidating that anti-Semitism is a hatred of the Jews as the conscience of the world. We are the carriers of ethical monotheism, the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments being the shortest, most succinct, and most effective summation of global morality. And there was almost a kill the messenger mentality. And if you could slaughter the Jews, you could slaughter that conscience, and then humankind would have no conscience by which to live. And Hitler, of course, wanted to set up a new world order. And that's why I think what you see is the more evil the person, the more they hate the Jews. Hitler was the most evil man that ever lived, but Stalin was not, hugely behind him, also genocidal and incredibly anti-Semitic, and probably planned a Holocaust of sorts of his own. But then he died in 1953 under mysterious circumstances. Some say he was poisoned, et cetera, but he had his own plans. Iran today is easily the most evil government in the entire world, a terror-funding government, a misogynistic government, a government that hangs LGBTQ men and women from cranes in city squares, and who is their number one enemy? The Jews. So you see this correlation that the more evil the individual, the party, the government, the more they hate the Jews. Is that what you have found also in your role as U.S. Special Envoy against anti-Semitism?
There's no question about it. That's why I mentioned these movements. I mean, Al-Qaeda, personification of evil. Daesh, ISIS, beheading innocent people. I mean, what kind of profanity, what kind of ungodliness is that in the name of God, they behead, human sacrifice? I mean, you can't get any less godly than that. That's what these movements are. And these are movements that are Hezbollah, another horrific, responsible for the death of, what are we up to now? 500,000 Syrians? 500 million innocent. We're not talking about Jews now. Arabs murdered in Syria by Hezbollah. So again, anti-Semitism is history's greatest barometer of evil and of human suffering. And so to fight this eternal evil really is to, you want to make the world a better place. You want to elevate humankind. You want to reduce human suffering. This has got to be the first address, or one of the first addresses. You've got to go to the source. And this horrendous evil is really the harbinger of so much human suffering, so much misery, so much destruction. And so that's why the United States has taken, look, if it were about fighting for and protecting the most persecuted minority in the world, that would be moral reason enough to do it. But it's so much more than that. It really is about fighting for that better future that we all want to bequeath to our children, no matter what our race, religion, nationality, what country we're in. We want that better future for our kids. And fighting anti-Semitism has got to be a part of that better future.
So Elan, this position that you occupy, created in 2004 under President George W. Bush, it continued through the two presidencies of, the two terms in office of a Democratic president, President Obama, of course, and now with President Trump. But there is a difference. People like me and many others widely regard President Trump as the most pro-Israel president in American history. And it would be hard.
Pro-Jewish. Yeah, I would say even beyond the most pro-Jewish.
I'm sorry? I
would say even beyond the most pro-Jewish president that we've ever seen.
That's what I was about to ask you. He certainly is the most president based just simply on accomplishments. In fact, when the New York Times kind of wants to go after the president's foreign policy, and you see it over the past few weeks, like with Jonathan Pollard, they'll actually have a headline saying, Trump gives yet another gift to Israel, even though that had almost nothing to do with Israel. He had completed his parole, but they'll mention the recognition in the Golan Heights, moving the embassy. There's no need to go through the whole litany because the list is so long. So he is the most pro-Israel president, and his detractors actually not only do they admit that, they use that as a cudgel by which to berate him. They kind of say the favoritism that he showed did not bring peace, until suddenly we saw this unexpected, just absolute breakout of peace in the Middle East among the Gulf states, the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan.
Yeah, I was going to say not only the Gulf states.
Only Gulf states. Sorry.
Not only the Gulf states, well beyond, from Morocco to the UAE, and many countries in between. I mean, it's breathtaking.
It's absolutely astonishing, and it's changed all the dynamics of the Middle East. So I do want to talk about that. I know you just came back from a visit, and you posted beautiful pictures, videos from Dubai. But let's just go back to the comment you just made. So you're saying that Trump's pro-Israel policies are based on a pro-Jewish policy? In other words, this is a president with the only president in American history to have a Jewish daughter, Jewish son-in-law, Jewish grandchildren. He speaks about them all the time. And his daughter is a practicing Jew, as are you, as is his son-in-law, as is David Friedman, the ambassador to the United States, as was Jason Greenblatt, the former chief Middle East envoy, as is Avi Berkowitz, the current Middle East envoy. I mean, I could go through the list. You believe that the president's pro-Israel policies stem not from diplomatic concerns and more from a pro-Jewish sentiment?
I think both. I think, first of all, the president and his entire team, including, I mean, my boss, Secretary Pompeo, is certainly very much in this line. They understand that, there are good guys and bad guys in the world. And yes, there are nuances, and you've got to certainly attend to nuance. But the fact of the matter is, Israel is a shining beacon for the world. I mean, it's really a model of tolerance and of diversity, of democracy, of self-criticism, of innovation, of world-changing innovation. I mean, it is really a beacon for the world, and all of this Israel has done, a very young country, with its hands tied behind its back, so to speak, by virtue of the constant military threat, the constant existential military threat through which Israel had to suffer decade after decade. And so, I think our administration is very clear-eyed about that. We don't nuance that. When you have a country like that, you know what? America is going to back that country, is going to celebrate, not just back, celebrate, champion a country that is such a model of decency. And by the way, such a stunning ally of the United States. I mean, really one of our best allies in terms of intelligence sharing and in terms of joint innovation projects. And just you go down the list, voting at the UN. I mean, it's really remarkable. And so the United States is not going to pretend like it's neutral between Israel and other countries. We're not going to pretend to do that. Previous administrations felt, for whatever reason, they needed to pretend. We are not pretending. So that's part of it. But there's also something else. And I really think there is a philo-Semitism to this president, certainly to the whole administration, the president, the vice president, Secretary Pompeo, former Attorney General Barr. I mean, really, it's very broad. There's a deep philo-Semitism in this administration, and understanding that Jewish history and American history are linked, that America's DNA is very much wrapped around Jewish values. And so, some of the policies, by the way, that you said there's a long list, there is a long list, but many of those things don't have to do with Israel. A lot of them have to do with Jews and protecting Jews and fighting for Jews. So it's not only about Israel. So I think to answer your question, I think it's both. Some of it is statecraft and geopolitics, but I think a lot of it is deep values, affinity, really a deep sense of affection for the Jewish people, and more importantly, for what the Jewish people represent, and for how that has really contributed to making America what it is.
Well, I feel like we're even making news that you're saying this, because no one would know this better in the administration than you, given the position that you occupy as the envoy against anti-Semitism. you're saying that the president's policies towards Israel, of course, are also motivated by global geopolitics, but they're motivated by a deep philo-Semitism, by an affinity with the Jewish people, by a respect for and connection with the Jewish people. That's fascinating, and it's really interesting because, in many ways, or I should say in some ways, prior to President Trump, it could have been argued that the most pro-Israel president wasn't even George W. Bush. It was probably Richard Nixon, because Nixon really saves Israel during the Yom Kippur War, when Israel was facing its greatest existential threat. And HBO Max just did a great job of doing that series, if you saw it, Elan, called Veil of Tears, about the Yom Kippur War, and the New York Times gave it a great write-up. But Israel was about to be destroyed. It had run out of ammunition. And the Jewish Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, kind of wanted Israel to get a bloody nose. He didn't want Israel to lose the war. He just didn't want them to have a victory the way they did in the Six-Day War, because he felt that then there would be no peace. But if Israel took one on the chin, then they would be prepared to negotiate. So he delays the resupply of Israel. And Nixon calls him up and says, do it now. And then suddenly every 9 minutes, a huge American
send everything that flies. That was the famous line. Send anything that flies.
And yet Nixon's support for Israel was not motivated by a philo-Semitism. He was caught on, tape saying horrible things about the Jews, so probably was motivated more by global geopolitics. This president, amazingly, to repeat, Jewish daughter, Jewish grandchildren, so many close Jewish friends, et cetera, et cetera. Jewish daughters-in-law, and yet, the most astonishing thing for me as a rabbi, approaching this president and this administration over the past 4 years, the most astonishing thing I'm going to remember is that when you had the most pro-Israel president, and whatever people think about President Trump on other issues, that's their right, of course, we're a democracy, but that on pro-Israel and Jewish issues, this president wasn't only called an anti-Semite, that he was repeatedly compared to Hitler, which not only, of course, trivializes the Holocaust, but it's an abomination. It's shocking. I mean, the disparity between those who are kind of most involved in the pro-Israel community and in the fight against anti-Semitism, seeing in the president someone who reversed the United Nations bigotry against Israel. Forget even moving the embassy and recognizing, the Golan Heights and things that you could see as strategic. I'm talking about changing the way that the UN looks at Israel. I'm talking about taking us out of the Iran deal because they were threatening the Jews with a second Holocaust, as Vice President Pence said openly. And I was there in the room in Warsaw, in the Strategic Conference in Warsaw some 2 years ago. And yet the disparity and discrepancy between having a president that you're saying is motivated by such deep philo-Semitism, did so much for the Jewish people and Israel, and has like a 96% approval rating in Israel, and yet you have Jews comparing him. I mean, get this to, I don't even want to say it because it's just disgusting to even have to repeat it. It's kind of shocking, right? I mean, it's shocking.
Well, it's more than that. It's madness. I mean, it's a form of mental illness, really. I mean, for people to say things like that, first of all, it is an obscenity to compare any U.S. president to Hitler, and it trivializes the Holocaust. It trivializes our great country, the greatest country in the history of the world, the greatest democracy in the history of the world. We aren't perfect, my goodness, but those comparisons are really obscene. But then to compare this president and to suggest that this president who absolutely loves the Jewish people and has done more for the Jewish people than any president we've ever had it really is insane. And it goes to show you the extent to which people have become so tribal,
yes,
so partisan, and so blinded by partisan furor and fervor that they have lost all sense of rationality. I mean, this is really an abandonment of rationality. What I would always say to people, look, I've addressed many audiences in my past 2 years. I've given well over 180 speeches in my last 2 years.
Good Jewish number.
And that's a good number, yeah. And I've, do I encounter some, liberal or even left audiences? Sure. And do they grumble when I say nice things about what the administration does? Yes, because they don't want to have to acknowledge that this administration does nice things for the Jewish people or does anything right. But what I always say is, look, here's how you look at it. It's not about conversion. You know, when President Obama did something good, I would say, look, and by the way, I campaigned against him. So just my bona fides, I was a surrogate speaker for John McCain, and you know, in 2008. So I campaigned against then Senator Obama. So I have pretty good credentials on how I believe that, you know, on that candidate and on that administration. But when he did the right thing, I said, Mr. President, thank you. This is the right thing to do. You have my support on this. Now, it doesn't mean I converted. It doesn't mean that suddenly I like the administration, but you acknowledge the good things the president does. And I would ask my audiences, why is this so difficult for you to do? You know, our parents taught us to say thank you when someone does something nice for us. And when that someone is the president of the United States, you say thank you very loudly and politely, and you stand in strong support of the president because he's earned it and he deserves it. Again, nobody has done what this president has done. On Israel, for sure, again, you mentioned many of the stunning, remarkable achievements on Israel. But let's think about this. We're the first administration to designate a far-right, white supremacist, anti-Semitic group as a terrorist organization. The president issued an executive order last December. I was at the White House when he issued it, to protect Jewish students, besieged Jewish students on campuses. Now you talk about. No, I was going to say, you know, we can talk party and politics, but you talk to Jewish kids on campus, and they'll tell you it is a siege. They're under siege on many campuses across the country. This is the president who stood up and said, enough is enough. I am not going to allow this to happen. I was there at the White House after he signed that executive order. He looked right at the cameras and he says, let me make this very clear to you. If you are a university and you are promoting the discrimination or harassment of your Jewish students, you are going to lose a lot of money. This is going to be very expensive for you. He said that right at the camera. And so it's not only about Israel. It's so many things he's done to stand and fight for the Jewish people. And my goodness, I mean, you know, we all, not only every single Jew, every single American ought to stand up and say, Mr. President, thank you. Thank you for being such a shining example of moral clarity and moral decency on this issue.
So I couldn't agree with you more because people can easily oppose the president. They can be Democrats. They could take issue with many of his policies. But the absence of gratitude is what you're really mentioning, Elan, that we started this conversation about values. You know, one of the most central and important of all Jewish values is gratitude. You know, Moses, the great prophet, the first thing God teaches him is gratitude even to inanimate objects. He wasn't allowed, and you know, students of the Bible will be very familiar with this. Moses wasn't allowed to smite. It's in this week's Torah reading. He was not allowed to smite. I'm sorry, it's in next week's Torah reading. He was not allowed to smite the Nile River because the Nile River had saved his life as a child. He wasn't allowed to smite even the dust of Egypt and turn it into lice. The third plague, because the dust of Egypt had saved his life. We're supposed to show gratitude even to inanimate objects. I mean, let alone to living beings like animals, and let alone, of course, to those who bear the image of God, humanity, human beings. But the absence of gratitude is such a sad feature of the United States today, and these two camps that we kind of have. You mentioned President Obama. I was very disappointed in President Obama's Iran deal. I fought it with all my heart, with all my might, because I felt it was a complete abrogation of American values.
You and I were in the trenches then. I remember very well. We were on the speaking circuit talking about how this was a disgrace for America. Really, it was a disgrace.
You give killers $150 billion. So that was a very raw thing. And yet, when Elie Wiesel died, and he died on a Saturday, on the 3rd of July, the 2nd of July, 2016, I'll never forget that at about 4 p.m, I was with the Wiesel family, and President Obama put out a statement, and he said that Elie Wiesel was the conscience of the world, the conscience of the world had died. And I said to myself that President Obama will always have a place in my heart for recognizing the world's most famous Holocaust as the conscience of the world. We are capable of transcending our partisanship and showing gratitude for those actions, those policies, which really are noble, which are virtuous. And I think with President Trump, we've never seen this much ingratitude on Jewish affairs, on Jewish subjects. Because the truth is, Elan, the past 4 years, what you have done by being so outspoken, and again, I say this, words that emanate from the heart penetrate the heart. I say this with no attempt at flattery, but I have a deep respect for you. When you first got this job, you and I saw each other at a Jewish conference, and I said to you, you are so well-spoken, so polished, so presentable, so professional, that you were the perfect choice for this. So everything that you've done, President did, and all the people we spoke about before, from Secretary Pompeo to the Vice President, you go through the whole list. What you've done is you've kind of made a lot of the pro-Israel organizations almost superfluous the past few years because the administration was fighting so hard for Israel. God bless President Obama. I'm sure he had good reasons for his Middle East policies, but they were roundly rejected, not just by the Israeli people. They were rejected by Saudi Arabia. They were rejected by Kuwait. They were rejected by the UAE. They were rejected. The President Obama's attempt to grant hegemony, Middle East hegemony, to Iran, and to make Iran almost a peacekeeper in the hope that they would change all this money and all of this attention, and the sanctioning of their nuclear program would make them a responsible actor. And of course, they only got worse and worse, more murderous. And here we are, just 3 days away from one of the most the bravest things that President Trump did while in office, and that was to kill Qasem Soleimani, a genocidal murderer, a mass murderer, a truly evil man who had erased the image of God from his countenance. And so whatever President Obama planned, and I'm sure it was with the best of intentions, I'm not here to question his motivation, it completely backfired to the point where in the last year of office, 2016, he goes to Saudi Arabia and he's not even greeted by the Saudi king. They're so upset at him for just not getting the Middle East. And now you have the end of 4 years of the Trump administration, and you have all the speculation that Saudi Arabia might even make peace with Israel. And even if they don't in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, God almighty, what a change. I mean, you have really witnessed history, Elan. You've seen things that are just mind-boggling, like your recent trip to Dubai.
It is mind-blowing. And what's amazing is that the Abraham Accords, this isn't the peace committed to a piece of paper. This is real affection. I was at the White House when the Abraham Accords were signed, and a senior delegate of one of the Arab countries, I had been negotiating my own deals with them about fighting anti-Semitism. So we knew each other. He came up to me and he said, he was bouncing off the walls. I mean, he was exuberant. And he said, don't think this will be a cold peace. We will do great things together. He was emotional. And I'll tell you, it made me emotional. I mean, to see the children of Abraham, the cousins, embracing each other with that kind of warmth and affection, it is breathtaking. And let me tell you, this would not have happened without the president's leadership and his peace team. I mean, Jared and Avi and David Friedman, Brian Hook. I mean, they have just worked miracles. And look, isn't that a bipartisan issue? Peace, my goodness, right? What is more valued than that? Real peace, right? Not only the absence of war, but real peace and affection between peoples. This is what's happened in the Middle East. And again, you see people poo-pooing it and saying, well, this isn't a big deal. I'm sorry, this is the biggest deal. There isn't much, there aren't deals bigger. This is a big deal. When you're talking about peace in the Middle East, that's the exemplar of a big deal. And that's what we've gotten. And it's amazing. And by the way, it's also a validation of our approach to foreign policy, which is you don't build peace on falsehood or fantasy. I talked about before pretending, unlike previous administrations, we don't pretend like we're neutral on Israel. Israel is one of our very best friends, and we act like it, and we shout it from the rooftops. So too, Jerusalem. We're not going to pretend like Jerusalem is not the capital of Israel. Everybody knows Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. President Obama knows that, and everybody knows that. But this absurd fantasy of pretending that it's not, or pretending that Judea and Samaria has no Jewish history, and that there are no Jewish claims in Judea and Samaria. Now, by the way, I'm not talking about territorial concessions here. I'm not talking about negotiations and maps and borders. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm simply talking about history. To pretend that there's no Jewish history in Judea and Samaria is absolute madness. And we've done it for years. We've engaged in this. We've not engaged. We've co-conspired in this absurdity for years. And where's it gotten us? Has it gotten us peace? No. And so here we said, enough is enough. We are going to build peace on the truth. Jared gave just a superb speech at the opening of the Israeli embassy in Jerusalem. And he said, this prophetically, he said in his speech, people will look back at this moment. When there's peace in the Middle East, people will look back at this moment as laying that foundation, because peace has to be built on truth. And again, acknowledging the Jerusalem. I mean, Jerusalem has only been the capital of the Jewish people since King David. That's all, just since King David. And so acknowledging that basic truth is how you build a world of sanity. And look what's happened. Again, we've built the Abraham Accords on that truth. And so I hope this is a lesson to our successors in the future, that whenever our successors take over, I hope they will always look at this and learn. I mean, look, we all learn, we all make mistakes, right? So I hope people who thought otherwise will look and learn and not go back to the bad old days, but continue this policy of strong philo-Semitism, strong support of the state of Israel, and building peace on a foundation of truth.
Well, I wish you were right. I wish that was what the future would portend, but I fear that it's not what's going to happen. Senator and now Vice President-elect Kamala Harris said during the debate, I remember again against Vice President Pence, that she was going to absolutely go straight back into the Iran deal. That was in the actual vice presidential debate. Now you have, 140 Democratic congressmen that signed. Again, this is not a partisan issue. This is a moral issue. They already signed a letter last week pushing Biden to re-enter the Iran deal. And that's absolutely shocking after seeing how much it failed in the Obama administration, and how Iran continued to be the worst, most brutal, bloodiest actor against its own people, of course. We're not just speaking about Israel and the Jews. We're talking about slaughtering and butchering their own people in peaceful democratic demonstrations. So I wish it were the case. People
I'll tell you,
follow your example.
Something about the Iran deal.
I don't know. And you know what? And to have to litigate this Iran deal thing all over again, I mean, who the heck wants to do that?
I'll tell you something about the Iran deal. I was speaking at one of my many opportunities when I fought this thing during that time, years ago, as you did. And it was popular at the time to compare the Iran deal to Munich, the kind of appeasement that we saw in Munich. And I said, let me point out some differences between the Iran deal and Munich. When Munich was signed, not a single British soldier had been killed by Nazi Germany. That's not the case here. Iran, before the Iran deal, had killed. I served in Iraq. I was in Iraq in 2003, 2004. Iran, through its proxies, through its armaments, through its weapons, killed hundreds of my fellow soldiers and also Marines and airmen in Iraq. And we did the Iran deal after that. And so it really was just a moment of disgrace. And look, now we see what happened, right? I mean, Iran didn't moderate. All the money that it gained, it plowed right into terrorism and mischief in the world. It undermined 4 Arab capitals: Sana'a, Baghdad, Damascus, and Beirut. It directly, I mean, the work of Hezbollah led to the murders of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Syrians. I mean, it is just disastrous. And so, I can only hope that people have learned. Iran, by the way, just announced that they're going to go to 20% enriched uranium. So I hope people are watching and learning how dangerous this regime is, not only for Israel, it's dangerous for us, dangerous for Europe.
That's what I'm saying. They have it. They've already announced that they're going back into the Iran deal, before they've even taken office. Let's just move away from this for a moment. By the way, I also just want to mention that, you're praising Mike Pompeo. Talk about a philo-Semite, someone who has a deep love for the Jewish people and phenomenal support for Israel. And I think a lot of that is based on his deep Christian evangelical faith, which I so respect. And John Kerry was the one who famously said, "There is no way Israel will have peace anywhere in the Middle East until it first makes peace with the Palestinians. So give up on trying any peace with the Gulf states." And of course, one wonders if he'll have the humility after the Abraham Accords to come forward and say, I actually had no idea what I was talking about, because his position was refuted so thoroughly. I also find it fascinating, all this is a bit off the subject because it's not about anti-Semitism, but it's about charges of anti-Islamic bigotry. But I was, Elan, I was doing a debate on Fox News against one of America's best known imams. And he was saying, Trump hates Muslims, and Trump is biggest Muslim hater and bigot against Muslims. And I said, and which president do you think was kind of the opposite? He said, President Obama. President Obama was a great lover of the Muslim people. I said, I said, because what I seem to recall, and maybe I don't recall correctly, is that when the world watched 500,000 Muslims murdered in Syria, when innocent Muslim children were foaming at the mouth, literally, from mustard gas, sarin gas, and poison gas, I remember President Obama turning to Vladimir Putin and telling him, can you solve this by taking away the nerve agents of Assad? Oh, you got it? You good. Then my red line no longer exists. But the guy that you're saying is the biggest Islamophobe, President Trump, he's the one who fired missiles at this genocide dare, Bashar al-Assad, for killing innocent Muslim Arab children. And it's astonishing that people have this very selective memory. Let's just turn for a second now to in the few minutes remaining to us, and I'm so grateful for your time. What about Europe? We're seeing, as you know, I spent 11 years as rabbi at Oxford University. To the students, European Jews really are worried about anti-Semitism. We're seeing attacks in countries like Belgium against shechita, against Jewish ritual slaughter, and without kosher meat, there will be no Jewish communities in Europe. When I lived in England, 220,000 Jews approximately, I would say a third of them were kosher, probably. So well beyond the 8 to 10% who call themselves Orthodox or observant. So many Jews are kosher. If you attack Jewish ritual slaughter, you're not going to have Jews living in your countries. And it's really an attack against Jewish observance, and let alone all the attacks at circumcision. We don't have to get into a debate about circumcision, but I have debated with anti-circumcision activists, and when I tell them that, the foremost doctors in the world say that we could have solved the AIDS crisis in Africa if men were circumcised, because it's so hard for AIDS to be transmitted among if a man is circumcised, be that as it may, the attacks on circumcision, I think, are motivated by anti-Semitism. What are your thoughts about European anti-Semitism, what the United States is doing to combat that?
Well, anti-Semitism is a global problem, and the banning of shechita and the discussion, the serious discussion, and there's actually pending legislation in some cases to ban brit milah, circumcision, is at least anti-Semitic in effect, right? I mean, there are a number of reasons why. I mean, purported concern for animals and children's rights and so on, but fact of the matter is it's anti-Semitic in effect because it makes Jewish life impossible. So that's one issue. But look, I arrived in Halle, Germany, intentionally on October 27th, the 1-year anniversary of the murders at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue. And I did that intentionally to make the statement, and obviously Halle, Germany, the site of the Yom Kippur synagogue attack that took the lives of several innocent bystanders. And so I arrived in Halle on that day to make the statement that anti-Semitism and its appalling rise is not a German problem, not only a European problem, it's not an American, it's a global problem. It's a global problem that requires a coordinated, focused global solution. And so a lot of the things I've been focused on is exactly that, coordinated global solutions on the adoption of the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. Because in order to confront a threat, you have to know the threat. And we have a vehicle for defining that threat. Physical safety, to make sure that countries invest the proper resources to ensure that their Jewish communities are safe. Another thing is hate crimes prosecutions. I'm a former prosecutor. I prosecuted hate crimes. I know how important it is when law enforcement authorities stand up and make that statement that a crime committed with ethnic or religious hatred as a motive is worse, is more morally offensive than a crime committed for other motives. And it's very important that those enhancements be applied. And so I've met with law enforcement leaders, not only in Europe, certainly in Europe, throughout Germany, but also in counties in the United States. I mean, I met with law enforcement leaders in Ocean County, where there is rising anti-Semitism in Lakewood, and Jersey City. I led a delegation of law enforcement leaders, including the Attorney General of New Jersey, to visit the scene of the murders in Lakewood. And we talked about hate crimes prosecution, how important that is. And so these have been our policy priorities. The internet, by the way, the reason why I'm always asked, why is anti-Semitism rising? It's been rising for over a decade now. It's because, the internet and social media, if you look at the rising influence of the internet and social media, rising anti-Semitism tracks it. And that's because, malign actors will use the internet and social media to transmit their hatred with unprecedented speed and global reach, the kind of reach that they'd never had, but now have. With a click from a darkened room, they can spread their venom throughout the world. That's what gives it so much potence. And so we organized the first ever U.S. government-sponsored conference on combating internet anti-Semitism. And so what we're doing is we're focused on this global coordinated solutions to bring the full force of coordinated multilateral efforts against this problem. And I actually believe that if people of goodwill are willing to stand up and fight this and work together to fight it, I think we can absolutely roll back this rise in anti-Semitism and really build that better future that our children and grandchildren so richly deserve.
Well, I agree with you, and that's why I really appreciate your efforts, especially in Europe, because Europe was once the continent with the most Jews. Then came the Holocaust, annihilating Europe's Jews, and now only a few 100,000 remain. The biggest group being in France, about 600,000, and then you go down to England, 200,000. After that, it's just tens of thousands. Poland once had 3.5 million Jews, and now it has about 5 to 10,000 Jews. And I don't want them to leave Europe. And I remember after the Charlie Hebdo massacres, I'm sure you recall, Elan, that Prime Minister Netanyahu, even legends like Natan Sharansky were saying, leave Europe, come to Israel. You have no home here. And amidst my deep-seated respect for the Prime Minister and for, of course, Natan, I don't agree with them. I don't believe that Jews have to be afraid of living in Europe, and I don't think Israel isn't there only to provide a sanctuary against the murder of Jews. Israel is the eternal Jewish homeland. It's the source of our aspirations, our dreams, our hopes. But it's not just there to help when we are threatened in France. I really believe that governments must do everything in their power to protect their Jewish citizens. Now, was that a message that you brought as the U.S. envoy, that you've been bringing as U.S. envoy to as
100%.
European Jewish leaders?
100%. In fact, I've often asked this question, well, should Jews leave? And my answer was always, not for that reason. I mean, if one wants to move to Israel to, out of Zionist passion, to live in Eretz Yisrael, in the Jewish homeland, absolutely, go for it. But no Jew should leave their country out of fear. By the way, whether it's to move to Israel or to move to the United States, nobody should have to leave out of fear. That's wrong. It's morally wrong. And so I've said that explicitly. And by the way, the Europeans get it. I mean, I can tell you that, the strong statements of President Macron on this subject, of Prime Minister Johnson, of so many others, that Jews absolutely are home. This is Europe is your home, they said, and they made very strong statements. And so I think that they get it. Now it's a matter of follow through. I mean, they make the right statements and they institute some of the right policies, but now it's really about follow through. Look, President Macron has really been lately cracking down on the anti-Semitism we see coming from militant Islam, not only because of its anti-Semitism, because of the threat it poses to France, but we're seeing a lot of positive movement. Now, I will tell you, there are anti-Semitism coordinators now in a great many European countries. There's an anti-Semitism coordinator for the EU, Katharina von Schnurbein, who is absolutely fantastic. Not only does Germany have a federal anti-Semitism coordinator, but every single German state has an anti-Semitism coordinator. The German Bundestag passed a legislation that BDS is anti-Semitism. The Austrian National Parliament has done it. President Macron has adopted the IRA definition. Every single Polish police officer is being trained on hate crimes prosecution. Hungary has rewritten its curriculum in its schools on these issues. There is a lot of good news out there, and a great piece of good news from the last year is what happened to the Labour Party in the UK. I mean, when a cabal hijacked a major political party in the UK, and the Jewish community said, this, what's happening is a threat to our survival. We can't live in this country. If this kind of anti-Semitism is going to be in 10 Downing Street, we can't live here. And not only did the Labour Party lose big in that election, but here's what's amazing. Ordinary Brits in exit polls, when they were surveyed, said that anti-Semitism was one of the reasons they voted the way they voted. They were embarrassed. They didn't want that kind of country for their kids. And so and now the Labour Party is going through a transformation. They're kicking the anti-Semites out. So, look, there's a lot of good news. And so we have to remember that with all the bad news, we've got to really understand there's a lot of good news too.
But a lot of the good news, I'm going to say this now not as a compliment, but almost as a warning to all of us. A lot of the good news resulted from your efforts, the administration's efforts. One of the reasons that Britain began to feel like crazy Jeremy Corbyn should be our prime minister was when you have such a pro-Israel American administration and Corbyn becomes prime minister, ain't no way. And, Brexit looming, so they're going to lose the European Union. They're going to lose the United States. They don't have a lot of places left to go.
And by the way, we called it out, just so you know, not only the model of philo-Semitism that the United States represented, but we called Jeremy Corbyn out. I mean, we made public statements. Secretary Pompeo did, the White House did, very public statements.
But I'm not sure that we're headed in the same direction. That's what I'm really concerned about. You see, what I basically saw over the past few years was this remarkable thing where the message was clear to the world. If you don't get along with Israel as the world's only Jewish state, because the people who hate Israel, it's anti-Semitism. They hate it because it's a Jewish state. If you don't get along with Israel, you're not going to get along with the world's largest economy. You're not going to get along with the world's strongest military. It was a pretty clear message. At the UN, we remember Nikki Haley even used the words, we're taking names. We're writing down your name if you're going to attack Israel unfairly. And then you said that the president, at the ceremony you were at, basically said, BDS on campus, you're going to lose federal dollars. And all these messages, they trickled down into real changes in government policies around the world, as they also got behind the message that if you mistreat your Jews or if you just demonize Israel unfairly, you're probably not going to get the warmest welcome in Washington. That was a very important message. But again, that was not true during the Obama years. Do I believe that President Obama, God forbid, absolutely not. I think, again, President Obama, many of his dearest friends, some of his highest appointees in office were Jewish. I think President Obama feels a deep affinity for the Jewish people. He just doesn't get it. He just doesn't understand the hatred of Israel is based on anti-Semitism, and that his policies towards Israel in the Middle East weakened Israel, weakened democracy, weakened human rights, and bolstered, even if he didn't intend it, bolstered the terrorism of Iran, et cetera, et cetera. So the message that other countries got was, hey, if the president of the United States is fighting with Bibi Netanyahu day and night, the democratically elected leader of Israel, and if he's forcing through the Iran deal, even with with Netanyahu having to risk his relationship with the American president by giving a speech against the Iran deal to a joint session of Congress, in 2015, the message that other European capitals got was, hey, listen, if you're fighting with the Israeli government, don't worry, so's the United States. Now the message is, if you're fighting with the Israeli government, you're probably not going to have the warmest relationship in Foggy Bottom. You're not going to have the warmest welcome, at Treasury. You're going to have issues because the United States is staunchly pro-Israel. So you're saying all this good news, and it's incredibly good news. I'm just not sure how much it's going to continue, because I fear that we're going to go back to so many of the things that you spoke about.
Yeah. I think,
and pretending that we're neutral on Israel. What kind of dumb pretense was that ever? How is the United States, forget Jew, non-Jew, Arabs, Jews are all children equally of God. Forget. How did we ever pretend that we are the equal, that Israel's the equal? How did American policy pretend that Israel's the equal of the Palestinian Authority, which is a kleptocracy, stealing billions from its people, to make Yasser Arafat a billionaire when he died, to make, Mahmoud Abbas's kids worth hundreds of millions? How did we ever pretend that Israel is that? Bibi gets in trouble for calling up editors and saying, you're attacking me too much in your newspapers. Whole investigations are being launched. But the kleptocracy of the Palestinian Authority, let alone the pay for slay, let alone, I'm not even talking about Hamas, which is an absolute genocidal government regime. So why the pretense was stupid. It was an affront to American values always. But Elan, let's be honest, we're probably going back to that pretense that we have to be neutral on the only democracy and freedom-loving government in the Middle East, and the kleptocracy and tyranny of the Palestinian Authority and Hamas.
By the way, you said that Hamas is a truly genocidal organization. But you know what textbooks they use in their schools? Hamas, PA textbooks. That's how bad the Palestinian Authority textbooks are. They're dripping with anti-Semitism, absolutely oozing with anti-Semitism, so much so that Hamas doesn't see the need to print their own books. They're very happy with the PA's books. So yeah, I mean, look, I think what you said before about the influence and the role of the United States in the world is deeply important. And I'm not sure most Americans understand how this works. As a diplomat, I'm often asked, what did you learn? I'm not a career diplomat, right? So I came into this, I'm a political appointee. They said, well, what did you learn coming into diplomacy? And the thing really I learned is how profoundly influential the United States is. I mean, when we're in a room, it's not me, it's whom I represent. They really want to hear what the U.S. position is, what the U.S. policy direction is. And we're listened to. Now, look, these are sovereign countries. They make their own decisions, of course. They don't take orders from us. But the influence that the United States has is absolutely profound. And as a diplomat, you see it. You see it all the time. And so there's no question, Rabbi, you're right, that our prioritization of Jewish issues, and certainly of Israel and Israel's security, has changed the world and made Israel a whole heck of a lot safer. And so really there is a cost to emphasizing, to not emphasizing truth and the right thing. And we pay a price for that in terms of the end result, which ends up being very much against US interests. And so this is a very, very important point that you made. Our strong leadership on this issue has absolutely changed the world. And it's very important Americans understand that. And only when the American public understands that and insists that our government does lead lead based on values, really lead the world based on American values, we are really risking our future.
Well, Elan, we've had you for an hour, and I don't want to take any more of your time. It remains for me to thank you for everything that you've done the past few years. And long may you continue to fight the good fight. I'm waiting for President Trump to sign the legislation so we can call you ambassador. That's what will happen. We will call you ambassador, correct?
Well, it's a little complicated. It's a Senate confirmed position. Obviously, we're out of time for a Senate confirmation, but we're figuring out exactly. I'll be acting.
That you will be the first to hold this ambassadorial rank. Okay, I guess, right? Since the position was created.
Well, this is the first time that this office will have ambassadorial rank. That's right.
They wrote in the stories about the congressional vote that not only will the envoy have the rank of ambassador, but he will then report directly to the Secretary of State. But I was sure that you were reporting to Secretary Pompeo anyway. Like, he took a very interest in fighting anti-Semitism.
That's right. I mean,
although you saw those press reports, right?
Yes, and not to get too inside baseball, I'm under what's called the Undersecretary for Human Rights. But the fact of the matter is, I've from day one, and this is again an indication of how this administration prioritizes the fight against anti-Semitism. it was made clear from day one that I would have direct access to the secretary, and I do, and he has always been, solicitous of my views. He's always deeply cared about what we're doing and how we're fighting anti-Semitism. I tell you that if I don't keep him updated, he calls me and says, "Hey, how's this? How's that? What's going with it?" I mean, Secretary Pompeo really, really cares about this. And having been at the White House so many times for meetings, the White House staff, of course, all under the ultimate leadership of the president, is just ferocious on this issue. When it comes to standing on principle and fighting evil, certainly the evil of anti-Semitism, this administration speaks with one voice, and it has been an enormous privilege to represent our great country, the greatest country in the world, and all the more so to represent the Trump administration no less so to represent the Trump administration in this important cause of fighting this ancient and yet recurring evil. And may we see the day when we vanquish this great evil from our midst and build that better future.
Well, Elan, look, we could thank the president, the vice president, the secretary of state, Jared, the whole foreign policy establishment, Brian. We could thank all those people. But the fact is that you're the one that holds the portfolio of the Envoy against anti-Semitism. So you're the one who deserves the most thanks. So thank you for everything that you've done.
Thank you.
I'm very grateful to you. You haven't changed one bit occupying these high positions of power. You have retained your accessibility, your warmth, your humility, and your goodness, your dedication, and your commitment to service. So thank you for everything. Please apologize to your wife for us ripping you away from your family for an hour tonight, but I cannot thank you enough, and God bless you.
A pleasure to spend time with you, Rabbi, and please keep doing what you're doing. It's so important, and you inspire me. Really, what you do is an inspiration. And so thank you very much. And to all our viewers, let me say Happy New Year. May we all have a happy, healthy, successful, blessed 2021. Thank you so much.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very much. God bless.